Hello everyone, how are you? Okay, so this video is a feedback session on the paragraph writing you have handed in via virtual classroom. This is the document you find or in the virtual classroom. You have the instructions. You have a prompt which is very similar to the prompt you find in an exam, and you were asked to produce the translation and the contrastive analysis of two sentences that were taken from your handbook. The first one is, I think it extremely odd that he says nothing, and es un placer para mí estar con ustedes en esta fiesta. You will see that I will be making reference to some of your own sentences or your rendition. This is because for me it is easier to point to the mistakes when I see the whole sentence at stake. And I think that it is better for you to see the whole sentence instead of hearing me saying out loud the sentence, okay? This is not for you to feel ashamed, but I think that it is a better way for all of us to learn and improve our productions, okay? First of all, what I consider of importance is for you to be careful with your grammar and your language, the way you express ideas. In this case, we speak of English and Spanish as being a pro-drop or a non-pro-drop language. So please look at how we write non-pro-drop or pro-drop. When we speak of expletives, we make reference to the expletive pronoun it or there as or yes, expletive pronouns filling in the subject slot or the object slot. So the verb is fill with the preposition in, fill in the subject slot. Then be careful with regards. We speak of in regard to or as regards. For example, as regards argument structure. Then there was a sentence that was the linking verb is functioning as the recipient of the predicate. I think this was a subordinate clause. That's why we find the ing form. I'm not sure, but I think this was the case. Be careful because we speak of a predicate functioning as predicator, and I am not sure about what you were thinking when you said the recipient of the predicate. Okay, that's why I have chosen this sentence. And then when we make reference to predicates and arguments, we speak of arguments. For example, 2, 3 arguments are selected for by the predicate think functioning as predicator. Okay, so this is the way or the pattern of the verb, selected for by. So the first sentence was, I think it extremely odd that he says nothing. And the renditions were, considero muy extraño que no diga nada, or creo extremadamente raro que no diga nada. So, in this case, we have seen that you, of course, made use of the contrastive analysis we have provided. And you saw that on my example, I have classified, on my example from the previous week, I have classified the subject, which was I, having the theta role of experiencer patient. We have said that there are cases in which we will accept the classification of the thematic roles as experiencer or patient because we understand that there are sentences in which it can be, or there is like a blur between the two categories. But in this case, taking into account that the verbs under consideration were think and considerar o creer, we believe that taking into account, of course, the definition of an element having the theta role of experiencer and patient are different. In this case, it would be more precise to speak of the subject as being or as having the thematic role of experiencer. If you consider that when we speak about a patient, we speak about an effect or a negative consequence that in this case the subject is experiencing, or there is something that affects the subject, which is not the case. I have signaled complemento predicativo obligatorio because there were some paragraphs in which you classified muy extraño o extremadamente raro as complemento predicativo obligatorio. Remember that in Spanish we can speak of complemento predicativo either subjetivo or objetivo if the element refers back to the subject or the object, and as obligatorio and no obligatorio. So in this case, analyzing or classifying the element as complemento predicativo obligatorio is not enough and is not precise because we need to say if this element refers back or modifies the subject or the object of our clause or of our sentence in this case. Then I would like to point out that he says nothing in English and que no diga nada is a oración subordinada sustantiva in Spanish and subordinada subordinate nominal clause. Subordinate nominal clause in English. That would be the meta language for classifying these elements. That he says nothing. One of the sentences in your paragraphs goes that he says nothing realized by a nominal relative that clause. Please be careful when you classify in terms of syntax, when you classify the elements, because it is not the same to speak of a nominal relative that clause, which is going to be which is one type of that clause, and something different to speak of a nominal or a subordinate nominal clause. In this case, we speak of a subordinate nominal clause because we have a relative pronoun that is heading our subordinate clause. In the cases in which we have or in cases in which the clause is an instance of a nominal relative clause, we see that there is a fusion between the subordinate conjunction and the relative pronoun, which is not the case in this instance. We will see that nominal relative that clauses are normally found in when we analyze clefting. Then you said the subject pronoun I has been omitted in the translation because Spanish is a prodrop language, because it does permit null subjects. Be careful, because in this sentence, in your rendition into Spanish, considero muy extraño que no diga nada y creo extremadamente raro que no diga nada, there is a subject. There is a subject that is not expressed at the surface level. That is to say, we do not have yo considero muy extraño or yo creo, but it is, as you have classified it, a sujeto desinencial. So you should be careful when writing and expressing your ideas, okay? Then you said the function that the anticipatory it fulfills is one of expletive pronoun. Remember that when we speak of it or there as expletive pronouns, we are not referring to a function that the pronouns are performing, but rather their classification as being a specific type of pronoun. So in this case, we speak of an expletive pronoun it or there filling in the preverbal subject position, which is the canonical position for subjects in English and in Spanish as well. But please be careful with your rendition because the it or there being expletive pronouns is not a function but a category in itself. Then I want you to I wrote this question here: why is there a selection for secondary predicate? Because many of you said that there was a secondary predicate selected for by this main predicate, but it would be important for you to know and to acknowledge also in your writing that the fact that this secondary predicate is present has to do with meaning. There is a difference in meaning at stake. So I have taken the definitions from RAE to show you the difference between considero tu propuesta and considero interesante tu propuesta. On the first rendition, considero tu propuesta, goes back to the meaning of pensar sobre algo analizándolo con atención. While in considero interesante tu propuesta, the meaning is pensar o creer basándose en algún dato que alguien o algo es como se expresa. Okay? And I point this out because there were some other paragraphs in which you said that the predicate was, this secondary predicate was present in order to have a grammatical sentence. Think that grammaticality here is not at stake. What is at stake is meaning. So, taking into account the meaning that considerar or creer has in these sentences, we need the presence of a secondary predicate in order to get this meaning across, in order to express the meaning of considering something as something, or yes, considering something as something. That is to say, the meaning expressed in point 2. Another sentence was, in this sentence, I think it extremely odd that he says nothing, the anticipatory it is used to make emphasis at the information provided at the end of the sentence. And I have highlighted this sentence because we need to avoid being categorical. With this sentence, we are asserting that we know what the speaker or the writer of this sentence had in mind and the reason for doing so. And this is not the case. What we have to do is to, we can hypothesize about what can happen taking into account the type of elements we have. In this case, what we can hypothesize is that this direct object, that he says nothing and que no diga nada, are direct objects that are long and that are more complex than just a noun phrase, like propuesta. So, in this case, if we consider the principle of end weight, longer and more complex elements go at the end of the sentence instead of being placed, maybe, in its canonical position. In this case, we know that with a transitive verb, the direct object normally goes immediately after the verb. But in this case, we can see that there is a movement at the end of the sentence, and this movement can be accounted for by this principle of end weight. The verb. When you classify the verb, remember that complex transitive verb is the label that we use for English, not for Spanish. In Spanish, the verb creer o considerar are going to be transitive verbs that happen to select a secondary predicate, in this case, due to or taking into account the meaning that the verb wants to convey. The meaning expressed by the definition in number 2 by RAE. Pensar o creer basándose en algún dato que alguien o algo es como se expresa. Then I wrote extraposition of a clausal object according to Grimham and Quirk, or extraposition of an internal complement according to Huddleston and Palom, because you confused the terms. So you wrote something like internal object extraposition or something like that. So remember that the specific terminology is either extraposition of a clausal object or extraposition of an internal complement. Remember that when we speak of argument structure, we are in the realm of semantics. So we must refer to the predicate acting as predicator, the arguments, and the thematic role the arguments performs. Okay? Not to syntax. We assume that you already did that, making reference to syntax in other section. ¿Qué pasa si la traducción que proveen es creo que es extremadamente raro que él no diga nada? In this case, we cannot speak of extremadamente raro as a secondary predicate. Why? Because it is not the same, creo, extremadamente raro que él no diga nada, in relation to creo que es extremadamente raro que él no diga nada. It would be important for you to see again the video on the rounding off that Professor Natalia did. Please watch video 31st, around minute 13. You will see there that in this case, what we have at stake is creer, selecting for two arguments, yo, which is a sujeto desinencial, and the direct object made up of que es extremadamente raro que él no diga nada. Within that direct object, so in this case we have creo, our predicate, functioning as predicator and selecting for two arguments. So we will speak of a predicado diádico. And then we will see that our direct object, que es extremadamente raro que él no diga nada, is made up of a subject, que él no diga nada, the verb ser, es, and the subject complement extremadamente raro in terms of syntax. And in terms of structure, we will speak of a nonverbal predicate, raro, selecting for only one argument, the subject, que él no diga nada. The verb es, in this case, is acting as container. So, be careful with when you make the transfer of our analysis to yours, because you must produce your own analysis taking into account the translation you have provided, okay? So in this case, what most of you did was transferring what you saw on our videos exact in the same way to this new analysis when the translation was different, okay? Let's move to the following sentence. Es un placer para mí estar con ustedes en esta fiesta. All the groups produced the same sentence. It is a pleasure for me to be with you at this party. Some groups classified this sentence in Spanish, es un placer para mí estar con ustedes en esta fiesta, as a oración presentativa con posposición de sujeto. This is incorrect, and please go back to the chapter on la estructura de la oración simple from Di Tullio, where she speaks about the presentative sentences, and she says that one of the features that these sentences normally have is that of having an intransitive and accusative verb. Entonces, una oración como murió el perro can be classified as presentativa due to the type of verb. Not only for the fact that the subject is postponed, is post-verbally located, but also because the verb is an intransitive and accusative verb. In this case, what we have at stake is the verb ser, which is a linking verb. So we cannot speak of oración presentativa con posposición de sujeto. There were some other groups that classified this sentence as a oración impersonal, which is also incorrect. According to the sources we consult, when we speak of a oración impersonal, we are making reference to a sentence in which there is no subject, either realized in the syntax or not. So we can only speak of a oración impersonal in sentences like son las 12 del mediodía. In that instance, we have a oración impersonal. In this case, in the case of es un placer para mí estar en esta fiesta, we have a subject, so we cannot speak of oración impersonal. Most of the groups identified para mí, this prepositional phrase, as a direct object. The problem with classifying para mí as a direct object is that, again, you're not taking into account the verb that it is at stake. The verb in this sentence is the verb ser. So a linking verb. A linking verb does not select for direct objects, but when we find a linking verb, we speak of or we can find subject complements. That on one hand. And on the other hand, when you analyze argument structure, you analyzed para mí as an argument. Para mí is not an argument selected for by the predicate acting as predicator, placer, in this case a non-verbal predicate, but rather a stance adverbial. This is an external constituent. This stance adverbial indicates the point of view or the opinion of the speaker. If we follow the terminology from Di Tullio, this would be a disjunto, but not a direct object or an indirect object, okay? Then you, in your renditions, in your sentences, in your paragraphs, you tend to equate extraposition and postponement as being synonyms. Please take into account that when we speak of, or in these sentences in which we are classifying or we are analyzing anticipatory it, we use the term extraposed subject. So this is going to be extraposition, an extraposed subject. While when we analyze sentences with an expletive there, expletive pronoun there, we will speak of a displaced subject. Again, some point related to meta-language. We speak of, or you wrote that this was an instance of extraposition of a clausal object, following the terminology presented by Greenbaum and Quirk. Now, this is an instance of extraposition of a clausal subject. You identified estar con ustedes en esta fiesta as the subject. So, this is extraposition of a clausal subject. Some of the renditions were: considero extremadamente extraño que él no diga nada. Please refer to page 32 in your handbook to read which are the cases in which we retain subjects in Spanish. Normally, we would get rid of the subject in our rendition of this sentence, as in considero extremadamente extraño que no diga nada. So, if you have chosen to express at the syntactic level the subject, well, there must be a reason. So please check the information you have on your handbook. Another sentence was: as regards argument structure, this is an instance of correspondence, since the predicators placer, pleasure select for two arguments. Remember that we speak of predicate selecting for arguments, not the predicators. So in this sentence, it would be: this is an instance of correspondence since the predicate or the non-verbal predicate placer, pleasure, functioning as predicators, select for two arguments. Some of you wrote en esta fiesta is functioning as an adverbial. Well, no, this is not the case. In the rendition, es un placer para mí estar con ustedes en esta fiesta, we have identified estar con ustedes en esta fiesta as one element. as a whole unit. So, because we understand that the prepositional phrase en esta fiesta has an adverbial function, but it refers back to the verb within the non-finite clause. That is to say, it refers back to estar, not to the main verb, which is conjugated, which is es. En esta fiesta is not modifying or referring to es, but rather to estar. That's why we cannot classify it outside the bigger construction that is estar con ustedes en esta fiesta. So let me check if there is something else that I would like you to know, but it is important for me to say that most of your analyses were good, were correct. We noticed that you used the analysis we provided, and most of the groups copy exactly our own words and our own way of expressing ideas, which is not incorrect, but the idea of showing you how we perform the analysis is in order to give you ideas and to show you how the ideas can be organized, but not for you to copy exactly our own words. We want you to feel free to write using your own style, and also complying and being able to use the meta language that is required by the chair. Well, I hope I was as clear as possible. In case you have specific doubts with your own productions, you know that you can go back to your student helpers to check and to ask the questions you may have. Thank you very much.